Questions on greenhousing. I think Kevin get there like at the end. Well, actually, Kevin, you can because they were your questions, so you can ask them.
Well,
You want the microphone so everybody in the back?
I'll stand up. My one question was if LEED certification has a particular value, or Energy Star certification, if that has a value that you can actually appraise.
Did everybody hear that?
No.
Did you take them all?
Maybe the speaker's
Good morning. So I wasn't prepared to do this. My one question was if LEED certification or Energy Star certification for a home has a particular value that can be appraised, or if it, I guess, maybe would have more of a marketing feature. What's your take on that, somebody?
Well, I think, as Bob was saying, that yes, it would be more of a marketing tool with the abatement, like Craig was saying, because the fact of the matter is, at this point, I don't know if we're, unless we can quantify what advantage it does give. I mean, at this point, what your savings with a greenhouse or Energy Star is something that you're going to see in the future. So, you know, at one point, to give you a little bit of an example, my house was built during the natural gas. They weren't building 78, 79. They were, you know, there was a moratorium on it. So everybody's, oh, you have an all-electric house. Well, over the last few years, compared to what the price of oil has been, my house has been relatively inexpensive to keep up. And of course, that time when you had to put a heat pump in, they were highly inefficient. Now, my heat pump is probably better than most of the gas furnace, well, not really. So there's the thing. The market changes, and to quantify, now, there's a lot of information coming up now about greenhouses and things like that that will help the appraiser and the realtor. I'm sure that there's going to be continuing ed courses for on the realtor side, because there are already on the appraisal side for our continuing ed cycle. And we'll be able to get a bigger handle on what to do. As the other gentleman said, quantifying the amount and making it stay and backing it up is the difficult aspect of that whole thing.
The question to you is, what kind of reaction are you seeing in the market for green homes? Is there a demand for green properties, and are people willing to pay a premium for that green property?
Who has green homes besides, I mean, I know Jeff. Jeff has Bankrupt Green. So you come up here and tell us about the demand and everything like that. I mean, are you seeing the demand for those homes compared to some of your other listings?
You know, it's hard to say. I mean, because I think a lot of it. I mean, with Bancroft Green in particular, it has a lot to do, I think, with the way that looks and the quality of it, in addition to the green. You know, I've had a couple green listings that might not have looked as great, and the buyers were not really too impressed by that. So I don't know that green in and of itself makes a huge difference. I know that one thing about Bancroft Green that buyers are more interested in than any kind of LEED rating or anything like that is the fact that it has the geothermal heating and cooling, which objectively reduces your energy bill every month. It's an objective number, maybe $150 a month. I don't know if that's if a particular savings, if an objectifiable savings in your energy bill can help increase the value.
Well, Jeff makes a great point about geothermal heating. And just to back up for 1 second, you don't make adjustments just for differences. They have to be quantifiable. You can have differences if they're not accepted in the market, or there's not a premium being paid for in the market. You can adjust for it. But the point about geothermal, I think, is fantastic. I see a lot of that in a lot of very high-end homes on the main line in Bucks County, where I live.
It's rare in the city.
I'm sorry?
It's very rare.
It's rare in the city, right? But in other parts of the area, you do see more of them, and people will pay a premium for that geothermal heating. It's a fantastic system, and that you can quantify. And typically, it is based on the savings, monthly savings.
Okay, anyone else have a question out here before we go to more? John?
Can each of you discuss how you evaluate deeded parking? There's some buildings in town where there are both developers and resales, and I've seen the appraisals come in all over the place. So how do you appraise deeded parking?
Well, right, so we're going to talk about balconies, deeded parking, added lots, buying on the 10th floor versus the 28th floor, all those little nuances of properties in the city of Philadelphia that always have open questions.
All right, so with regards to new construction, or newer construction, we can draw a line and say the developer is charging $75,000 for a parking space, and it's being accepted in the market. We can make a $75,000 adjustment for parking. Of course, it depends on the area of the city that you're in. Same thing with floors. We did an appraisal. We're not going to mention the property, but the developer was charging a premium per floor, $5,000 or whatever per floor.
10,000.
And we can make an adjustment for $10,000 per floor because it's being accepted in the market. People are paying that $10,000. Now, fast forward 10 years from now, okay? The seller says, I paid $10,000 per floor premium when I bought the property, and I want that to equate to today. Well, people aren't, it's not being absorbed in the market the same way. At the time, they were, but that's not necessarily the case now. And that's important. It's important that it has to be, again, quantifiable. You have to go to the market and say, this is what people are willing to pay for. Porches and balconies, outdoor living in Center City, Philadelphia, is very important. There was a property that I was working on in 130 South 18th Street. This property had a very large terrace, 1,000 square feet. The square footage of the unit actually was not quite as large as some of the other units in the building, but the price was similar to properties that had larger square footage because of this outdoor living. This was a very unique situation, and there are only a few that are like that. And I've appraised a lot of them that have these large terraces, but people are certainly willing to pay a premium. And I did that based on a price per square foot basis, not at the same level that I would do interior living space, but certainly a large enough percentage that it really properly showed what the value of that outdoor living space was. What else do we have? Parking, balconies, floor.
Added lots. So I have a house.
Added lots is the whole thing.
Right, I have a house, and then I have this lot right next to it that's coming with the house.
Okay.
But it's just a lot.
Because I had one. The added lot, there's a couple things that have to be taken into consideration. Whether it's the way it's deeded. Now, if it's two separate deeds, two separate tax numbers, the whole thing, it is actually, we could do it and combine them, but legally, it's going to come up as there's two separate tax numbers, and it has to be appraised separately. So if it's an extra lot, yeah, it's worth something. I did a house a while ago that was on Pine Street, and there was a vacant lot next to it. But it wasn't vacant. The guy owned it, and he had developed it. Later on, he sold that lot. Well, that lot had extra value at that point because there was a market for that lot. And then there's $1 million house sitting there right now. But the problem is, there wasn't a problem with that because they had it all in one deed. He actually had to have it re-subdivided as later on.
But Jay, what happens like the parking spots? I've seen it where parking spots, and I think Donna can attest this, where it's premises A, premises B.
Right.
Because certain developments have the parking spot that's a block down. So what's the difference between that and how you value it versus if I have this added lot and it's premises A and premises B, but they're buying it together?
Well, then it's going with the property. In other words, it's an integral part of the property at that point, and it's being sold as part of that property. But I was talking more about a buildable lot. So the question is, and sometimes they'll ask you, well, is that lot that the car is being parked on, is that a buildable lot? Because they don't want to finance they want to finance, they'll finance an extra lot. Like in the suburbs, they will finance 10 acres, you know, versus 5 acres, because there's a certain amount of that's given to the property due to that having the larger lot. The same thing with this extra lot is providing parking, and it's part of the property. It's an A/B on the deed. You value it together. It's when it's separate that we can't do it that way. Now, as far as parking a block away, now you have to look at what, and I think what everybody here notices, and what we have to look at as appraisers is, what is the market driving us to do? We look at every property and every different amenity as what a typical buyer, that's the first thing I ever learned, first time I ever did an appraisal, was what will a typical buyer pay or look at as being important. Now, the thing is, in the suburbs, like at a row house in Oxford Circle where I grew up, a garage isn't worth really that much because you can hardly get your car in there. You go around 1800 Delancey Street, I use that as an example. How much is a 2-car garage worth versus a 1-car garage? You know, it is worth a lot more for that. We were talking about the floors, and I wanted to elaborate on something. Years ago, when out in the suburbs and anywhere where they were doing new construction, but were lots, they always throw lot premiums at you. I learned early on that from a realtor that when the market's really good, all of a sudden the lot premiums go up in a development because more people want to buy them. So, okay, here's another way to make more money. It's that's what you're in the business for. You're not in the business to be a charity. So you notice that when the market gets tough, all of a sudden the lot premiums disappear. Now, had that, like the same thing with the floors. If you're selling, if you have people lining up to buy your condo, you can raise the price per floor. Whereas if you don't have them lining up, you'd rather have more people, more people looking at it. Maybe you would make the difference less.
Okay. So it's just a timing thing. But is there, like, do you look at parking spots that are in different, like Rittenhouse Square versus other neighborhoods and per house that's sold, or?
Value changes based on location.
So just location and location. That's one of the first things I learned, location.
Right, so the old parking spots beside the hill is worth a lot more than if it were Fishtown.
Right.
And
Okay.
going back to buildable lots, we're lots.
If you want to just use the microphone.
If it's a separate buildable lot, we cannot value it on the appraisal. Right? We can only value the house with the improvements. So the buildable lot's got a separate value. If it's an A/B premise, then that additional parcel, it's deeded together, and therefore it's going to be given minimal value for privacy only.
Okay.
Right. So unless in fact you can get parking there, then that would change that that whole.
So if the realtor communicated to you that they already have approval from the city to turn it into a parking spot, that's something that they should be telling you, because that would add value to that property.
Then the acreage is based on parking and not just additional privacy.
Right.
Because if it's additional lot space, it's only given value for privacy only, and then if it's a buildable lot, that's a totally separate value. And John, I wanted to mention all adjustments are based on the market, right? No matter if it's parking, kitchens, for example. You could spend $150,000 on a kitchen, it may only add $25,000 in the marketplace. It's all market driven. It's all based on market, buyer reactions. So cost does not create value. You got to remember that.
Carl, I think you had a question, and then Johanna.
Yeah, just related to that issue of adjustments for things. Is that related to an area? For example, is a comparing two houses, one that has a powder room and one that does not, does that come off the standard schedule, or is that adjusted by neighborhood? A powder room in a Rittenhouse Square house might be worth a whole lot more than it is in South Philadelphia, for example. But, and in fact, I've seen a lot of these adjustments that are, they have no bearing to what it would take to actually put one in. Central air, for example. Adjustments for central air in houses versus non-central warehouses seem to be very low compared to my perception of what the difference in market value is, and certainly compared to the difference in putting the central air system in.
So
Any adjustment, any feature, the value's going to change based on the location, based on the perception in the market. So central air, it certainly adds value. But it's coming from the market, and it's always market driven. So you got to remember that an item may cost a certain amount of money, but it may only return less than that based on what the market will bear for that item. And it always changes based on the location and price segment.
So, okay, Johanna, and then I'll...
Why would, if I have a parking space at Wanamaker House, parking license?
Here, wait. Sorry.
Get one of the runners to give it.
Why would, if I had a parking space at Wanamaker House, which is a deeded space, versus a license at Park Rittenhouse, for example, the supply and demand for parking is basically the same location, why would I value Wanamaker significantly less than Park?
Who wants to grab that?
I think it's simple, it's just the supply and demand.
It's the same supply and demand, it's the same location.
Well,
I mean,
I don't know.
Well, so you're asking the difference between license and deed?
yeah, the deed, yeah, more, not the deeds, I mean, what's the question?
Deed you own.
The deed you own it, so you.
The license, you only have a license for a parking space.
The license.
That again
One is
is,
48 maybe max, and the other 75. And I had an appraisal issue at Wanamaker where I wanted to bump the parking up $10,000 and they wouldn't do it, so we had to give a $10,000 credit. I mean, it just doesn't make sense to me.
a lot of things do. I mean, any one of us up here will say,
Is there a
we don't
value
understand everything.
between the deeded and the licensed parking? I mean, it's basically the same neighborhood,
Yeah.
same parking,
Right,
the
it
same
should be,
demand.
it should be.
So the
similar.
market really doesn't justify.
Yeah, it should have been the same. What you were having an issue with was somebody's perception of what the value is. But a parking space at either one of those places, maybe they were looking at what it cost. And that's maybe where they came up with the difference. But in essence, it still allows you having a parking space. So it should be worth the same.
Jay, what about the fact that the property being sold as Henry's house is so much more in value?
Right.
Oh, it's property.
Well,
Could it have to do anything with the value of the property comes that much of a difference?
it may influence what an appraiser does. It may have some bearing on it if we see that, but typically within an area like that close between Wanamaker House, and you're going to see difference in value of property value. Parking should be pretty similar. You may see a difference, but there's going to be differences amongst appraisers as there are amongst realtors. I've had realtors say to me, oh, that parking space is worth $75,000, and then I talk to another realtor who says it's worth $50,000. So there's difference in perceptions. But I was actually wanted to address something Carl had asked, and he was bringing up, it's not so much about parking, but he was talking about like improvements. And what you were talking about was cost versus value, and there is a big difference. I always tell everybody, and I do some litigation work, and I just did some, that it dealt with what percentage, what increase would be like putting an addition onto a house. Well, every year, I think it's the Home Remodelers put out and actually Philadelphia Magazine usually runs it too. It's probably due out to real estate. You guys probably have been contacted. And it gives you the percentages. Now, if you go online, you can get regional percentages of what a bathroom, and what they do is they do an analysis. They have people who do statistical analysis. And we do that as a guide because, of course, to put air conditioning in a hot water heated 6,000 square foot mansion is going to cost probably $35,000 to $40,000 versus, so yes, there is a difference between neighborhoods. And quality, I mean, you're not going to put in, even though we're seeing it now, used to be you don't see granite in Fishtown. Now you're seeing granite, quartz, and everything else. But because it's granite, it's also come down in price. So you are seeing that, but is it going to bring the same amount? Like you expect it on Delancey Street, but you don't expect it in Fishtown. So that's another thing that motivates what the buyer was willing to pay.
Okay, Bob, we're going to go to you for the next one. You'll like this one. Please explain the issues of a boarded-up home next to or on the same street as the subject property. What kind of impact does it have on value, and how do you address that?
Well, at one point, an adjacent vacant property was a reject for even trying, right? But over the last few years, we've worked that out.
Well, Irene, I mean, you have a boarded up, how would you treat it on an underwriting perspective? So you have the city came in, the DA came in, and there was drugs going down in the house, and it's a boarded up home, basically at the end of the street from the home that's our subject property.
Right. So there's a couple different things that we have to look at. Is the property located in an area of revitalization, right? So is this one of a number of properties that have recently been sold, and the area is in revitalization, and we can support the fact that this property is on its way up in value, and the area is on its way up, versus this is just, there's going to be 3 more board ups on this property in the next 6 months. It was an FHA regulation where you really couldn't have a boarded up property, and it's gone away. It's more about what is going on in the overall neighborhood, and that the appraiser discloses it to us, because if we just see it in a picture, now we're going to question the whole area, and why do we have a board up, and why didn't the appraiser mention it to us? But if the appraiser's done his job and described the neighborhood and the trend, and if market areas or market increases are justified, the fact that there's a board up on a block really isn't impacting it. It's the adjacent property. We may want to question the structural integrity because there's a board up right next door, and if it's not being maintained, on a row phone, it could have impact on structural integrity of our unit. But the fact that there's a board up adjacent or on the block is just not a reason to just disqualify a property from collateral value, but it's just something we have to address.
Or just take that special picture and angle it. So Marie and Irene, you didn't hear that.
If we explain an adjacent boarded up property, gentrifying location, then no impact on value, then generally will still accept it. So it's all based on whether it's a gentrifying location with no impact on value, and we have to state that. If we explain that, then it's could probably then will be accepted.
And one of the things that you as realtors should take a look at is what's going on with the property next door. Because I can't tell you how many times that we find out that the property was just bought, and then we finally, manage to contact the owner. It turns out that they're going to rehab it. That can also have somewhat of an impact.
Positive. Right. Positive. Yeah. Question.
Yeah. Hi. How would you adjust for the value of a home that they're in the same neighborhood, but they're in different school catchments? For example, in Queen, the Meriden catchment encompasses homes that are in Queen Village and Bella Vista. You could literally have a house across the street one house that's on the north side that's in the Meriden catchment, which is one of the best schools in the city, and literally across the street, or one block north, one block south, east, or west, is not in that catchment.
My voice. Right. Because we've had that issue, and and I've discussed it that because the marketability is definitely different when you have those catchment areas.
It definitely is. The situation now in the city, though, with charter schools and stuff, kind of takes it out of the equation, but it's always nice. I mean, it happens over in the University City with the Penn Alexander catchment area. I know a lot of people who have bought over there who have bought a house specifically for that, and there is some added value to it. Again, we go back to the point is, if we can quantify it, and sometimes we can, I will make a comment in my neighborhood section, and that's part of our job, is to basically tell the reader of the appraisal, who's going to be, whether it's Irene or whoever it is down the line, this is why we're doing what we're doing. So the same thing goes for all the realtors here, is You have to make sure that if you're going to do something and you're going to change the value because of that, explain it to, and I see a lot of you in, it's a big thing in the MLS, they'll say independent Alexander catchment area. So people know that. And well, that's important because a buyer will pay more for that if they feel that there is. Now, everybody always asks me about like Radnor and like other school districts and like, is there a big difference? And a certain price home, the school district doesn't need as much. If you're living in a very high-end house, whether you're in Radnor or Lower Merion, there's a good chance your kids are going to private school. So does being in a certain one school district over another, and how can you make the difference? I live in the Chamonix School District. We're right next to Council Rock School District. For years I used to hear Council Rock is so far superior.
Oh, it is.
Well, it is a little bit. Listen, there's a huge difference. Only because, but wait a minute. He went to Council Rock. He's a graduate. Larry and I don't know about Bob and Ed, we both went to Northeast High School. And let me tell you, and so did I. That's a public high school.
So did I.
And so did Kevin's brother, see? And there's probably a few others. So does that, is that going to make the difference? To go to Northeast High School nowadays, if you watch that Tony Danza show? I don't know. But I have friends who teach there. And it is that type of thing. There is definitely a value to the catchment areas, get back to that.
And there is, and then, we've come up with the catchment area on our side, and all the Trident loan officers know, and we've uploaded information in the catchment area for the file to support the appraisal. I think there was even on the news that they're waiting out, people waited for 12 hours when the enrollment went out this year. They were just sitting in those chairs like it was like the day after Thanksgiving sale to get their children enrolled into the Linda can answer that. I mean, true, right?
In the middle of January, on the coldest nights, people started waiting at 11 o'clock in the morning. The line was full by 4 a.m.
Right.
For the 50
Right.
slots.
And it wasn't even the day after Thanksgiving. So that's how important these catchment areas, and we realize that, and as your mortgage consultant, we have all that information, and we will help support that value with the appraisers.
Okay. Everything's on the internet, so for us, you run Penn Alexander catchment area, there comes up at least 50 to 60, or maybe more items, and I just, it's so easy to cut and paste like things, you give it credit, and I put that stuff in my report because you know what? It explains from an outside source why things are more valuable or less valuable.
So Kevin has a big topic or big issue that we've gotten a lot of questions on.
Okay, we're going to send this to Ed. Ed, how do you adjust for...
To Jay.
Okay. Jay. Sorry. How do you adjust for seller assist?
Well, you have to make, it does drive the market, because if every property if you have 5 properties on a block, and we're just being in a magical world, and they all have sold for X amount, and they've all had different seller assists, basically the property is actually, in essence, to make them all equal, you have to adjust for them because there's a value consideration when somebody is paying less. So if you don't make those adjustments, you're basically not you're not adjusting to what the market's doing. The market is saying, okay, we will sell the property for this, but we'll give back 3%. Now there are limitations as far as the government and the different mortgage programs, how much you can give back. So yeah, I think it's 6%. I'm not sure if that is.
Yeah, we can't exceed closing costs. We can go into all that.
Let Craig answer a little more of this.
So it's something we were talking about before. But so getting back to the Fannie Mae guidelines. Fannie Mae guidelines state, with regards to seller concessions, that the appraiser needs to adjust out the exact amount to show the actual consideration paid to the seller. And that's the key point, the actual consideration paid to the seller. The reason was because Fannie was finding that homes were artificially inflated by the seller concessions. Thank you. So my approach has always been to adjust out the exact dollar amount of seller concession, again, to show the actual consideration paid. Now, this is obviously very important for you to understand how we view it, because when you have a sale, when you're trying to price your property, and you have a sale at $200,000 and have a $10,000 assist, this is comparable, understand that the appraiser, at least this appraiser, is going to look at that property as a $190,000 sale. Okay? Now, we understand that the concession is needed to help facilitate the closing of that loan, or that sale. I understand that. But the guidelines is pretty clear. It states to adjust out the equal amount to show the actual consideration paid to the seller. And it's to avoid artificially inflating values.
But if there's comparables to support the...
But what's a normal adjustment? What is the normal adjustment for the seller concession? I mean, if you get into the issue of seller concession, and you've got a comp that had a $9,000 seller assist, and one had a $4,000 assist, and one had a $2,000 seller assist,